Good afternoon. I know we're running a little bit late on time, so I will try to talk fast, but as I was speaking with some of my colleagues earlier, I'm from Texas, and people from Texas talk a lot, so I will work hard to move us through this. Just to cover briefly what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go over why do we care about universities as a place to do startups. I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience growing program worldwide and what we've learned along the way. And then I also wanted to speak a little bit specifically to, it seemed like there's a great deal of interest in how can we get the startup culture in Korea moving bigger and better. So I'm going to speak to that as well. So in the US at least, post-2008, the economic crash, we found that the sectors that recovered the best were energy and tech. And those companies that had the most growth in those particular sectors, they were younger companies. Additionally, they were opportunity entrepreneurs who were leading those companies. And what we mean by that is an opportunity entrepreneur is someone who starts a company that is usually technology, larger scale. They see a need and they solve that particular problem, and it can address a much larger market as opposed to a necessity entrepreneur. A necessity entrepreneur is someone who opens a coffee shop or a food stall, something that's much smaller scale and is serving elements of that community. The scalability is much more limited. So the most growth was from opportunity entrepreneurs. And those founders, almost all of them had some college experience, which that's what led us to really see the opportunity inside the university space. But there's a lot of reasons why we think the university is a really amazing place for startups and why it's incredibly underutilized. First off, it's just a bunch of very intelligent people, and they're packed very close together. This sounds a lot like a startup accelerator or a startup incubator. What's also unique is the demographics of the university audience, is that they're young and have a much higher risk tolerance than other sectors of the population. Most university students do not have a mortgage yet. They don't have a family they have to support. They're in a position where they can take the risk that's inherent in being an entrepreneur. The talent is also underpriced. Someone who graduates from a university and becomes a software engineer, their starting salaries are fairly high. But in university, they don't know how much they're worth yet. And you can get them with the promise of equity and other approaches. But there's also just something special and unique about the university environment. It's a very creative place. And these are some of the factors that we saw. Our lens on the world inside the university, but even just beyond that, about entrepreneurs is that it's a bullseye. And in the middle of that bullseye, you have your Mark Zuckerbergs and your Larry and Sergey Brins, the guys who are going to be entrepreneurs, your Michael Dells, the guys who are going to start companies no matter what. And they're going to be successful. You can help them, but they're going to make it no matter what. And there's other folks on the outside of that ring who, no matter how many resources you give them and how much support you provide, they're just not going to do it. They're not entrepreneurs. They're not going to take that on. What we are extremely interested in is that middle circle where the groups who could go either way. With the right support, we think we can help steer them towards entrepreneurship and the opportunity that comes with that. So, again, universities are the places where so much innovation comes out now from the tech commercialization side. We think that there's a lot more market-facing opportunity there. And a lot more opportunity for companies to get born, not necessarily in a technology transfer office, although we do a lot of work with those offices as well. And we've learned a lot about how to move that forward. So, on a macro level, there's just some basic things about the silo problem inside of universities. And by that I mean the business people don't talk to the design students, who don't talk to the engineering students, who don't talk to all these other different groups inside of a school. And we wanted to find a way to get them together in a meaningful way. But additionally, we see that most universities have far too much an emphasis on lecture and theory-based approaches to learning. And it is our firm belief after doing this as long as we have that experiential education and practice-based learning is the key to getting more startups coming out of universities. And we also noticed that other disciplines have actually figured out more practical approaches. If you're a chemistry student, you have lab sessions. If you're an artist, you have studio sessions. If you're a mechanical engineer, there's a machine shop. We wanted to create an environment like that, a sandbox for entrepreneurs at the university level. But as far as the problems that the students face, is that there's a lot of latent student interest in starting companies. They have ideas, but we've noticed that over time it's these three things what holds them back the most. Specifically, they have trouble finding co-founders. We believe strongly in co-founder theory, in a business and a technical co-founder and getting a company going. And with that silo problem that I mentioned earlier, it poses quite a barrier to doing that. There's also, it's hard to find mentors with real business experience. You can find great professor mentors, but it's harder to find mentors, business people who've started companies and gone through that experience. And additionally, investors. There are some schools like Stanford where there are venture capitalists walking through the campus every day, just ready to hand out money to students. Most university campuses are not like that. And we wanted to find a way to help bridge those gaps. So we started our program called 3-Day Startup. My founders and I, we had all worked in or founded early stage companies. And here, when I was in grad school, there was just a lot of taking tests and writing papers. And our belief was that this is not the best way to teach entrepreneurship and to get students actually starting companies. So we started it as students, getting students together, and I'll talk more about what actually happens there. But over time it evolved into where we eventually turned it into a company and started spreading it. So in 2010 we actually incorporated. We'd done it at a few different schools. We'd done it at the University of Texas, where we were from. We did it in a school in Germany, and then a few others in the United States. And when we tested this model, it worked in other campuses as well. So since then, we've done 70 more schools at 70 more programs at 25 other schools. In Asia, we've done Bangkok, Beijing, and Shanghai. And we're really excited to learn more about how this community here works. Also, Mr. Ehrlich, it was a pleasure to have him here. We've done Israel, and they had some extremely talented business students and developers along the way. But we've had good results as well, in terms of students actually starting companies. They've raised around $11 million. Actually, we had one company announce they raised a Series A $4 million yesterday, so we're actually up to about $14 million. But these are different student startups that have emerged out of 3-Day Startup, and so it's had a pretty good track record. We've also had good success with companies getting into very prestigious accelerators and incubators, such as Y Combinator and Techstars. And that tends to be where we fit in the cycle a lot, is that when we run one of our programs, students emerge and then go apply. They're then ready to get into a good accelerator. So in terms of what some of the key components are of the actual program, is that there's a selection process. So students actually apply to get in. They fill out an online application, and in many cases we actually interview them. What this does is gets the best students in the building to help them move forward. There's a lot of brainstorming and idea pitching. We have a process through which they pick the ideas they're going to work on, and which teams they're going to join, and it's very, very self-directed. And what I mean by that is that this is a very, very intense program. It's 3 days, and we're trying to put 5 or 6 months of progress in starting a company into 3 days. And students are only going to work that hard and be that excited and emphatic about it if they get to choose which companies they're working on. So we actually we give them a lot of latitude as far as which projects they want to work on. We also have an extremely strong focus on business model. All the students we work with, they're really interested in Facebook and Twitter and these companies that started with no real business model. But we actually try to dissuade them against that and push them very strongly towards business models, there's credible ways that they can make money. As I said, a lot of cross-collaboration. We also have a very specific mentorship process that we found is kind of best suited for the university audience and connecting them with people in the private community and how that interaction actually happens. And of course, the primary output of the weekend is pitches and prototype demos. Again, those are the most concrete things you need to raise money and get into an accelerator, and so that's what we focus on. As far as how those 3 days actually happen, it's extremely intense. As I said, they're moving very, very fast. In the beginning, we're going to talk about which ideas each student brings an idea that they want to work on the entire weekend. The students themselves are going to vote on the ones they like the most. There will be 7 or 8 concepts that become the focus that they vote on, and each of the students will then join up on one of these teams and work on them throughout the weekend. On day 2, we focus very, very heavily on customer discovery, and I'll explain what that is, but these are the broader general breakdown of how this unfolds. Some things that we do not do is that we don't have cash prizes, or we don't award winners. Collaboration is, again, a very key part of this. We find that a lot of programs with cash prizes, when you do that sort of thing, the teams don't help each other. And we have 2 goals. Our goals are for students starting companies and to support entrepreneurship ecosystems. And when it's a competition with a winner and it's a zero-sum game, we find that there's a lot less sharing. And that it's quite common at our programs where if one team is short on developers or designers, another team will lend that talent over the course of the program. They understand that it's valuable to help all of them out, and it's the beginning of a community. We also don't focus much on business plans. We think it's useful as something that a student can do to help think about the long-term viability of their business, but most of the investors we talk to don't care about business plans, and so neither do we. This is just a picture, again, visually of all that's happening, mentoring, coding. They drink a lot of energy drinks. One time a kid had to go to the hospital because he drank 12 in one day. It was not pretty. But it's very fun, and as you can see, it's an extreme focus on, again, this community building and getting them focused on doing. And we want them to make great friends with each other. We don't spend a lot of time doing meet and greet activities where they explain where they're from and what they're doing. We actually just get them right into actually doing these companies. And we find that energy and pace actually bonds them together and makes them better friends than if we spend a lot of time talking. Again, we think there's enough talking. We want more doing, and that's a huge part of our philosophy. So we also do our programs inside of companies. Over time, doing them in universities, we realized how this model was working in terms of uncovering great startups. And several companies heard about what we were doing and asked if we could run the same thing inside of their companies with students. And so for students, or for these companies, it's more of an innovation tool. What they're interested in is that they're the market leaders in their space, and they have great ideas and experience and wisdom in what they're doing, but they want to know what's next. And the people who know what's next are the students. It's the students who have all the really exciting ideas and have none of the limitations that a lot of the more senior folks in a lot of these companies have. So we bring students inside of a company for a weekend, and they start companies in the generic, in the vertical, like the domain of that particular company. And the company brings their employees who help mentor these students and help support them along the way. And it's just a great way to explore new lines of business for the company, but the students get an opportunity to partner. When any companies that come out of this program are usually going to partner with the host company. And we, in fact, HomeAway is a vacation rental company. They're actually publicly traded and the market leader in that. Retail Me Not is the #1 digital couponing space in the world. And they actually have already started partnering with some of the companies that have come out of our most recent program there. So people always wonder how we work and how we set this up as we move it forward. We're a nonprofit, so we don't take any equity, but governments, accelerators, and the universities pay us to run our programs inside their walls. And one thing that's very important to us is that we wanted it to be free to students. We wanted students, we didn't want money to be a factor in them not being able to participate, and so we've been able to hold true to that thus far. So in terms of what we teach, what we found that resonates best with the student's audience in terms of leading them to actually start companies, it's these 4 things. I'm going to go over them in a little bit more depth. Paul Graham is the founder of ViaWeb, which was acquired by Yahoo, and now runs Y Combinator, which is the most prestigious accelerator in the world. And the thing he says more than anything else is, build something people want. It sounds simple, but it's actually more complicated than that. What happens is that we tend to get really excited by technology and features. And we think just because something is new and complex, that means that's going to be the best product that's going to have the most success in the marketplace. And there's just so many counterexamples of where that's not actually true. Apple being one of them, with an extreme emphasis on simplicity. So we focus very much on, again, finding a problem, a pain in the market, and solving that. Additionally, a big problem we deal with students is that anything they create, they fall in love with. And they assume that because they thought of it, it must be great. And it's their baby. And that's good. We want them to be passionate about the ideas and the companies that they're working on. But it's insufficient. The market, the people who are going to pay for and use the products and services that they're building, needs to love it too. And so we spend a lot of time getting them to think about, again, a very problem market-facing approach to the world and not just falling in love with their technology. We do a lot of work with, as I said, we do work with research scientists and groups like that, and they tend to have a bigger problem with this than younger students who don't come with that bias because they've developed an expertise in that particular field. But we've even learned some pretty good ways about how to help change their mindset a little bit too, along the ways of how that business focuses. So the way you do that, the way you get people to stop thinking only about the idea they've thought of and about the problem is by talking to customers. And so this is a very key part of our program, is that we actually we make students leave the building and talk to people on the street. If they're building something for a consumer, we have them stop people on the street and interview them. If they're building something for a business, we have them go to that style of business. Now, it may be the case that the type of business they're going to serve isn't open, or they don't know anyone directly in there. Well, again, that's another key part of the community that we're building, is that if, for example, you wanted to make a student team is making a company that does scheduling software for a doctor's office, someone in that group of participants at that program is going to have a parent or a sibling or a friend who's a doctor, and they'll connect through that network so that that team can then talk to that doctor and make sure that they're building something that that doctor, who is the customer, would actually want. And we actually, when we're limited in particular communities, we draw on our larger network of having done this and built these communities in so many places. We lean very heavily on it as we move forward to help connect students with ideas to people who can give them good feedback as they build those particular ideas. But it does lead to some interesting stories. We've had students get ejected from grocery stores and things like that just because they were talking to the customers and the managers didn't really like that. But again, our larger goal is a focus on execution and practice. We think that the instructive value of building a prototype or executing a marketing plan or trying to sell something, even doing that poorly, is better than being able to talk really beautifully about it but not actually do it. And so we have an extreme emphasis on doing it. And doing it poorly is fine. And over time you're going to get better at it. And I'll talk more about how we perceive that. The fear of failure is actually the fear of failure is another massive component that we see in working with different communities, is that some of the groups we work with, they don't need fancy methodologies. They don't need to know about lean startup or customer discovery or agile development or all these different sophisticated approaches to starting companies. What they need is it's a very almost spiritual thing, which is they just need to understand that if they do something and fail, it's not going to ruin them. And we provide a very, very safe environment in which for them to do that. So this happens. At our program, a team will get going and start a company, and on day 2, they fail. They realize that no one is going to pay for this, and it's not a good idea. Well, no one's going to look at them funny at our program. We're going to say, okay, well, now you just keep moving. Move ahead. And that's what we're trying to inculcate across all of our participants. So just our specific recommendations as far as if you were trying to grow your own good sense of programs inside of a community, focus on practice and execution based. Make concrete outputs, pitches and demos. Focus strongly on intensity and making it exciting. We have as I said, they drink a lot of energy drinks, and they don't sleep, and it's forming tribes almost, and that's a very key part of what we do. We want them to bond closely enough that they remember who each other are, and that a month later, if they need a designer, they knew that there was someone at the program who was a designer, and they know how to reach and get that person. Or they knew that someone there has a friend who's an investor who can put them in touch. Again, we want to create that sort of thing, and the way we do that is by creating a tribe and making it extremely intense. We also think you should talk a lot about success stories, and this is the number one thing we think in a community that's more nascent, is that if you do have a few examples of someone starting a company and having it work, tell that story everywhere. Let everybody know that there's a model here, that this is a world that is accessible to them, and it doesn't require a very complex degree, or it doesn't require having a very rich family member to start a company. That world is much closer than you think. So just, again, a few thoughts on growing your own startup communities. The big mistake we see a lot of different groups trying to make is they're trying to replicate Silicon Valley in their own space. You can't do this. Silicon Valley was not planned. It just happened. It was the after effects of the semiconductor industry, Stanford influencing a lot of that. But some of the wealthiest venture capital firms in the world are on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley, and that's a key part of why Silicon Valley is what it is. If you don't have that type of VC and angel community, that's going to get you in trouble. So what I'm going to do is talk about our own startup community, which is Austin, which is much more similar to startup communities around the world than Silicon Valley. That gentleman on the right is Josh Baer. He is a gentleman who started a company, sold it, and with some of the wealth he generated, started an accelerator called Capital Factory in Austin. And 2 weeks ago, President Obama came to talk to him about what he was doing right there and how we could use that as a model for the rest of the U.S. And he's been a longtime supporter of what we do, a 3-day startup, and invested in many of the companies that have come out of our program. So I'm going to speak to a little bit about what his model is and how we've worked with him and what we've learned along the way. So 3 pillars: physical space, community leaders, and angel investors. And I'll talk about how to interact with those. Physical space means a dedicated space in one form or fashion to people who are getting together and starting companies and projects. And it can constitute a number of different things. Incubators and accelerators, co-working spaces, but even coffee shops. At a lot of our programs in Europe, coffee shops are the startup center of gravity in a lot of these different communities. So Longhorn Startup Camp is the University of Texas student incubator. And just merely having a building where students could go and work on ideas had a tremendous impact on the quality and speed at which these companies got moving. There's lots of academic research about how physical space matters. We read it, we think that's good, but what we've seen is that the actual effect of it is huge. Having dedicated spaces is extremely meaningful in terms of getting companies going. And as I mentioned, Capital Factory again, they have a co-working space and an accelerator, and it's really done wonders in terms of, again, the startup kind of center of gravity in the Austin community. This is a picture during one of their programs of just what it's like. It's not that complicated. It's a space, it's tables, it's fast internet. But the programs that they have there, and just having dedicated space is what's been great for it. This is a quick snapshot of a lot of the startups in Austin. Capital Factory itself is that red dot. So there's 109 startups based in there. I'm going to move us along because we're running out of time. So how you engage your community leaders, we also find is a key part of the fabric of the ecosystem and how that actually works. I have some ideas about how you guys could apply this here in Korea, but I need to learn more about your startup scene. I'm going to keep us moving because we're running out of time. We recommend very, very strongly and as much as possible to engage your angel investing community. If you don't have an angel community, you can start growing it slowly but surely, and the way you do that is by mentorship. We find that mentorship, the act of connecting angel investors with younger companies, even if they're not investing, this is how you sow the seeds of actual fundings happening and beginning to grow those communities as they complement how you work with the business community and the community leaders and the physical space. So just to wrap all this up, focus on doing, whether it's your programs or whether it's just if you're giving advice to any of the young startups in your community. The wins, talk about them. Let everybody know, and let the community know that there's a lot of opportunity for startups there, even if it's still nascent and growing. Focus strongly on risk-taking. Mr. Ehrlich again referred to that entrepreneurs are the types who want to take risks, and we believe very strongly in celebrating and encouraging that sort of thinking. Support dedicated spaces and don't copy Silicon Valley. That's it. Thank you very much.